Caleb Whitaker did not believe a stranger could save his daughter until the baby who had cried for 3 days went silent in the arms of the woman he nearly turned away. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the Whitaker ranch house looked less like a home than a place grief had locked from the inside. The stove had burned low. A broken milk bottle lay near the table, white drops spreading across the plank floor. A kettle hissed itself dry. In the cradle by the cold window, little Lucy Whitaker screamed with the thin, worn-out sound of a child too tired to keep crying and too miserable to stop. Caleb stood over her in yesterday's shirt, boots unlaced, one hand pressed against the cradle rail as if strength could pass from his fingers into that tiny body. "Please," he whispered, though he had not prayed since the cemetery dirt froze over his wife's grave. "Please, sweetheart. I don't know what else to do." The knock came from the back door, soft at first, then twice more against the storm. Caleb turned fast, his hand closing around the rifle beside the flour bin, not raising it high, only holding it the way a man holds the last thing he understands. No decent person came to a ranch door at 3 in the morning. No trouble announced itself politely either. He crossed the kitchen, pulled the door open, and found a woman standing in the rain with a carpet bag in one hand and a flour sack tucked under the other arm. She was round through the waist and shoulders, her dress dark with weather, her cheeks pale from the cold. Strands of brown hair had escaped her bonnet and clung to her face. She looked tired enough to fall, but her eyes stayed steady on his. "Mr. Whitaker?" she asked. "I came about the cook position." Caleb stared at her, then passed her into the black yard. "At this hour?" "The freight wagon left me at the wrong crossing. I walked the last 2 miles. Then walk back when daylight comes." Her gaze shifted beyond him, straight to the cradle. Lucy's cry cracked again, smaller now, sharper somehow, and the woman's face changed. Not with fear. Not with pity. With recognition. "That baby ain't only hungry for milk," she said quietly. Caleb's jaw tightened. "I asked for a cook, not another mouth to feed. Then let me earn the fire." "You got references?" "No, sir." "Family?" "None that would claim me." "Experience?" "Kitchens. Babies. Long nights. Those are the only references that ever mattered much." He should have shut the door. He knew he should have. A lone widower did not bring a strange woman into his kitchen before dawn, not in a town that could turn one whisper into a trial before breakfast. But Lucy's cry shook through the room again, and the woman did not look away from the child. She only set down her carpet bag and held out both empty hands. "If I can't quiet her, I'll leave before sunup." Caleb gave a hard, humorless breath. "And if you can? Then you'll have breakfast on the table by 6. For a long second, the only sound was rain striking the porch roof and Lucy fighting for another breath. Caleb stepped back. "If you can stop her crying," he said, "you can stay till dawn. Nothing more." The woman entered without triumph. She went first to the wash basin, scrubbed her hands in cold water, then held them near the stove until the chill left her fingers. "Name?" Caleb asked. "Mabel Carter." "You touch her careful, Miss Carter." Mabel did not answer. She lifted Lucy as if the child had been waiting for exactly that shape of arms, tucked the blanket lower, warmed a cloth near the stove, and laid it gently against the baby's middle. Then she began to hum, so soft Caleb could barely hear it. Lucy's crying broke once, caught in her tiny throat, and stopped. The silence filled the kitchen like a door opening in a house Caleb thought was dead. He gripped the table hard, staring at his daughter asleep against Mabel Carter's shoulder, and for the first time since his wife was buried, Caleb Whitaker was afraid to breathe. Caleb did not move until Lucy gave a small sleeping sigh against Mabel Carter's shoulder. The sound was so gentle it seemed impossible that it had come from the same child who had filled the house with crying for 3 days and nights. Mabel stood beside the stove with the baby tucked close, one hand spread wide over Lucy's back, the other holding the warmed cloth in place. She was not smiling. She was listening. Caleb noticed that first. Most people came into grief talking, offering Bible verses, advice, apologies, pity. Mabel Carter came into it quiet. That made him trust her less and need her more, and he did not care for either feeling. "Where did you say you came from?" he asked. I did not say. Her voice stayed low so it would not trouble the baby. Caleb stepped around the broken milk bottle and set the rifle on the table, far enough from his hand to look decent, close enough to reach if decency failed him. Then say it now. Mabel looked down at Lucy before answering. A boarding house outside Helena. Mrs. Wexler's place. I know it. Then you know she hires cheap and speaks cheaper. Why did she send you away? Mabel shifted Lucy slightly, and the baby's mouth relaxed against the blanket. Because winter makes people count mouths before they count hands. Caleb narrowed his eyes. That is not an answer. It is the truest one I have at this hour. He studied her dress, the muddy hem, the patched elbow, the carpet bag near the door that looked too flat to hold much of a life. You have a letter? No, sir. A recommendation? No, sir. Somebody who can speak for you? Mabel finally looked at him. If I had people eager to speak for me, Mr. Whitaker, I would not be standing in a strange kitchen before dawn asking to cook for my keep. He looked away first, which angered him. The room had gone so quiet that the clock above the cupboard sounded rude. Caleb crossed to the cradle and touched the folded blanket left there, the one his late wife had sewn with yellow thread. His fingers stopped on the edge. You listen to me plain, Miss Carter. I need meals cooked. Bread made. Coffee hot before the men ride out. That is all. Yes, sir. You sleep by the stove until I decide otherwise. Yes, sir. You do not go upstairs. No, sir. You do not enter my wife's room. I would not. You do not open her trunk, move her things, wear her apron, or ask questions about her. Mabel's eyes softened, but she gave him no pity. I understand. Caleb swallowed once. And you do not start thinking that because my daughter quieted for you, this house has made room. For you. The words came out colder than he meant, but he let them stand. Cold words built fences. Fences kept a man from losing what little remained. Mabel nodded as if she had been handed worse rules by better-dressed people. I came for work, Mr. Whitaker. Not belonging. Lucy stirred then, a small complaint rising in her throat. Caleb reached for her on instinct. Give her here. Mabel placed the child carefully in his arms and stepped back at once, hands folded against her waist. Caleb held Lucy the way he had been holding her for days, tight with fear, high against his chest, as if he could keep the world away by locking his elbows. Lucy's face wrinkled. Her breath hitched. The cry came back, thin and wounded. Caleb closed his eyes. No, sweetheart. Please no. Mabel did not move closer. She only said, loosen your shoulder. His eyes opened. What? She can feel you bracing for her to break. She is a baby. Yes. That is why she feels everything before she understands anything. Caleb stared at her. The advice was too gentle to be in order and too right to ignore. Slowly, shame burning behind his ribs, he lowered his shoulder and settled Lucy against the bend of his arm instead of gripping her against his chest. The cry weakened, but it did not stop. Lucy turned her face, searching the room. Searching for the soft voice near the stove. Mabel looked at the floor. Caleb saw it. So did she. The first roll of the house had lasted less than 5 minutes, and the one who broke it weighed barely 10 pounds. He stepped toward Mabel and held the baby out, his jaw tight. Take her before she wakes the whole ranch. Mabel accepted Lucy without triumph, and the crying faded again. Caleb stood in the kitchen he owned, watching a woman he did not know hold the child he loved more than breath, and he understood with a hard, bitter clarity that every rule he had spoken meant nothing if Lucy kept choosing Mabel Carter first. By 5 o'clock, the eastern window had gone from black to the color of cold tin, and Mabel Carter was still standing in Caleb Whitaker's kitchen with his sleeping daughter in the crook of one arm and biscuit dough beneath her other hand. She had tied her own faded apron over her travel dress, rolled her sleeves, and moved through the room as if she had been born knowing where every useful thing ought to be. Flour dusted her fingers. Coffee boiled strong on the stove. A pan of bacon warmed slow enough not to burn. Caleb watched from the doorway with Lucy's empty cradle behind him, feeling like a stranger in his own house. You do not have to hold her and cook, he said. I have held heavier things than a baby while doing harder work than breakfast. Mabel did not look up. That was not an answer. It was the only one I had time for. Outside, boots sounded on the porch. The first ranch hands came in half frozen and half asleep, smelling of wet wool, horses, and early chores. Gus Miller entered first, a broad man with a gray mustache and a habit of speaking before kindness caught up with him. Behind him came Tommy Rusk and Eli Boone, younger men who stopped short at the sight of Mabel by the stove. Gus looked from Caleb to the baby to the woman with flour on her cheek. "Well now," he said slowly, "is that the new cook, or did the flour barrel grow arms overnight?" Tommy laughed under his breath. Eli looked down at his boots, embarrassed, but not brave enough to say so. Mabel's hands paused only long enough for Caleb to notice. Then she pressed the dough flat and cut clean rounds with the rim of a tin cup. Caleb felt the insult land across the room like a hand striking wood. He should have spoken. He knew at the moment he did not. But grief had made him slow in all the wrong places, and pride made him colder than he wanted to be. Mabel set the biscuits in the oven and shifted Lucy against her shoulder. The baby did not wake. Gus took off his hat and hung it by the door. "No offense meant, ma'am." "Then I will not spend any taking it," Mabel said. Her voice was mild. That made the room quieter than anger would have. Caleb's eyes moved to her shoes. They were cracked at the sides, still damp from the 2-mile walk in the dark. One heel had rubbed her ankle raw enough to make her favor that foot, but she kept moving, sliding plates onto the long table, pouring coffee, turning the bacon, spooning gravy into a chipped white bowl. The men sat because hunger was stronger than awkwardness. Gus took the first biscuit like a man expecting punishment. He broke it open, steam rising into his face, then covered it with gravy. One bite. Then another. The talking stopped. Tommy reached for the butter without making a joke. Eli Boone shut his eyes for half a second as if the taste had carried him somewhere kinder than the room he was in. Mabel placed Caleb's plate at the head of the table and stepped back. "Breakfast, Mr. Whitaker." Caleb had not eaten at that table since the morning before his wife took sick. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to keep standing in the doorway where a man could pretend he did not need warmth, food, or anyone's hands making order out of ruin. But Lucy slept on, soft cheek tucked against Mabel's shoulder, and the kitchen smelled of coffee, bacon, and bread instead of sour milk and fear. Caleb sat down. The chair sounded too loud beneath him. He picked up a biscuit, broke it, and tasted it. For one dangerous second, the house felt alive. Gus cleared his throat, staring down at his plate. "That is a fine biscuit, Miss Carter." Tommy nodded. "Best one this kitchen has seen in months." Eli, the quietest of them, glanced toward the baby and said, "Feels like a home again." Caleb's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. The words struck something buried so deep he nearly rose from the table to outrun it. Mabel looked down at Lucy, and for the first time since she had crossed his threshold, the corner of her mouth lifted. Not proud. Not victorious. Just tired and tender. In her sleep, Lucy made a tiny sound almost like a laugh. Every man at that table heard it. No one moved. Caleb set the biscuit down very carefully, pushed back his chair, and walked out to the porch without a coat, because the cold morning air seemed safer than what had just happened in his kitchen. Caleb stayed on the porch until the cold had worked through his shirt and into his bones, but even that could not quiet the sound he had left behind. Not the crying. The silence. The little breath of Lucy sleeping. The low scrape of chairs as the men finished breakfast without another joke. The soft movement of Mabel Carter inside his kitchen, putting things back where grief had knocked them loose. By the time he stepped inside again, the ranch hands had gone to the barn, their plates clean enough to shame them. Mabel stood at the wash basin with Lucy tucked in the cradle beside the stove, one bare foot rocking it gently while her hands worked through the breakfast dishes. Caleb noticed the foot before he noticed anything else. Her shoe sat near the hearth, damp and split at the heel. The stocking beneath was worn thin. "You need to sit," he said. "So do you. I own this house. That does not make your legs less tired." He almost answered sharply, then Lucy stirred. A tiny wrinkle crossed her forehead. Her mouth opened. Caleb moved before Mabel could dry her hands. "I have her." He lifted his daughter from the cradle, careful, too careful, and tucked her high against his chest. For half a second Lucy stayed quiet. Then her face reddened, her hands curled, and the cry returned, not as fierce as before, but full of protest. Caleb turned his back to Mabel as if pride could block sound. "Come now, sweetheart. It is only me." Lucy cried harder. His jaw tightened. Mabel dried her hands slowly, but she did not come forward. "Lower her a little. I know how to hold my child." "I did not say you did not." "Then do not stand there teaching me like I am one of your kitchen boys." The words struck the room and stayed there. Mabel folded the towel over the basin edge. Her face changed only a little, but Caleb saw enough to regret it. She had been corrected that way before. Maybe in kitchens. Maybe at back doors. Maybe by people who thought a woman with soft arms and a patched dress should be grateful for every hard word. Lucy kept crying. Mabel looked at the baby, not at him. "Hold her like she is staying," she said quietly. Caleb went still. "What did you say?" "You hold her like she is glass. Like the next breath might take her from you. She feels it." Babies feel fear through a body before they know what fear is. Caleb looked down at Lucy. His hands were firm beneath her, but his arms were locked, his shoulders raised, his whole body braced for loss. He hated that Mabel could see it. He hated more that she was right. Slowly, he lowered Lucy into the bend of his arm. He let his shoulder drop. He opened his hand across her back instead of gripping the blanket. Lucy's cry weakened into broken little sounds. Caleb stared, afraid to hope. "Now breathe slower," Mabel said. "She is listening to you." He drew in a breath, then another. The baby quieted, but her eyes kept searching past his sure front, past his chin, past the man who loved her and did not know how to stop frightening her with it. Her gaze found Mabel. One tiny hand lifted from the blanket, fingers opening and closing toward the stove. Caleb saw it. Mabel saw it too, and looked away as if the child had given her something she was not allowed to keep. "She wants you," Caleb said. The words came out rough. "She wants the song," Mabel answered. "What song?" Mabel hesitated. "The kitchen clock ticked twice. The one I hummed earlier." "Sing it." "It is not mine." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "How would you know what is mine?" Her face lost color. She reached for the towel, folded it once, then again, though it was already folded. "I heard it years ago." "Where?" Lucy whimpered. Mabel stepped closer despite herself, and the baby settled at the sound of her skirt brushing the floor. "There was a woman at a church supper near Bozeman," Mabel said. "She had kind eyes and yellow thread on her cuffs. She sang it to a baby who would not sleep." Caleb could not move. Yellow thread. His wife had sewn yellow thread on everything because she said brown houses needed sunlight in small places. "Her name was Anna," he said. Mabel nodded once. "She gave me half a loaf of bread when others pretended not to see me." Caleb looked from Mabel to Lucy, and something old and tender passed through the room, not replacing the woman who was gone, only proving kindness could outlive the hands that gave it. At last, Caleb placed Lucy in Mabel's arms. Mabel sang the song, barely above a whisper, and Lucy went quiet against her shoulder while Caleb stood close enough to hear every note and far enough to understand he was no longer the only one carrying Anna's memory. The song changed the kitchen, but the flour sack changed Caleb. It happened near dusk, after a day of small miracles no one knew how to name. Lucy had slept twice. The men had eaten supper without complaint. Mabel had scrubbed the stove, folded the baby cloths, and set bread dough near the warmest corner of the hearth. Caleb had spent the afternoon repairing a loose hinge on the back door that had banged all winter, though he told himself it had nothing to do with Mabel flinching each time the wind caught it. When the last pan was washed, she lifted her flour sack from beside the pantry and a folded paper slipped out, landing face up on the floor between them. Mabel saw it first. Her hand moved fast, but Caleb was closer. He picked it up before she could stop him. The paper was crease-soft from being opened too many times. The writing was neat, sharp, and mean enough to feel colder than the room. Mrs. Wexler regretted to inform Miss Mabel Carter that her services were no longer suitable for a respectable boarding house. Guests had complained about her size, her plain appearance, and her presence near the front dining room. She was advised to seek work in back kitchens, where women of her shape were less likely to disturb paying customers. Caleb read only once, but once was enough. Mabel stood very still. Lucy slept in the cradle, one fist tucked beside her cheek. The stove clicked softly. Outside, the first snow of evening brushed against the window. Caleb lowered the paper. Who wrote this? You read the name. Who let her write it and still call herself decent? Mabel reached for the letter. It is mine. Caleb handed it back at once. Not because he wanted to, but because her voice had drawn a line he had no right to cross. She folded it with careful fingers and tucked it into her apron pocket, though the care made the insult look heavier, not smaller. It is only paper, Mr. Whitaker. No, it is not. It is what people say when they think a woman should take less space than God gave her. Caleb had no answer for that. Mabel turned back to the table and began wiping flour from the boards, though there was almost none left. Her hands worked steadily, but her shoulders had gone tight. He noticed then the red mark around one wrist where a rope handle or travel strap had rubbed too long. He noticed the raw place above her heel from the broken shoe. He noticed the way she carried her hunger as if it were bad manners to have any. Did they feed you before they sent you out? He asked. Mabel gave a small laugh with no joy in it. Mrs. Wexler said I had eaten enough in this life. Caleb looked toward the pantry, then back at her. Something hard and quiet moved through his chest. Sit down. I have bread to turn. Sit down, Miss Carter. She looked at him then, wary but not frightened. I came here for work. Not pity. Good. I am poor at pity. Then what is this? Caleb crossed to the stove, took the stew pot from the back burner and filled a bowl. He set it at the table, placed a spoon beside it, then cut a thick slice of the bread she had baked. Supper, he said. She did not sit. I am the cook. A cook still eats. Not before the house. This house can wait. Mabel looked down at the bowl as if kindness were a language she knew but had not heard spoken in a long while. You should not be soft with me, Mr. Whitaker. People mistake softness for promises. Caleb rested one hand on the back of the chair. I am not promising anything I do not understand. Then do not start. Her voice trembled only at the edge. I know how to be useful. I know how to be laughed at. I know how to leave before folks get tired of seeing me. But I do not know how to be looked at like I am something that was wronged. Caleb looked at the pocket where the letter had disappeared. Maybe that is because no one had the sense to look right. Mabel's eyes filled, but she did not let a tear fall. She sat at last, slow as surrender, and picked up the spoon. Caleb turned away before she took the first bite, giving her the privacy of dignity. From the cradle, Lucy stirred but did not cry. Mabel lifted her head, listening. The baby settled again. Caleb stood by the window, watching snow gather on the dark glass, and his voice came out lower than he meant it to. Pity does not keep a stove warm. Mabel looked at him. No, sir. It does not. Caleb kept his eyes on the snow. But justice might. By the next morning, the Whitaker ranch had begun to move by a rhythm Caleb did not recognize and could not deny. Coffee was ready before sunrise. The stove held steady heat. Lucy slept in a basket lined with clean towels beside the kitchen table, while Mabel turned dough with flour on her wrists and a calmness that made the room breathe easier. Even the men stepped softer when they came in, as if the house had become a church and the baby its small sleeping bell. Caleb stood near the door with his hat in his hands, watching Mabel cut biscuits in neat circles. He had meant to ride fence before breakfast. Instead, he found himself noticing that she had mended the torn corner of Lucy's blanket with yellow thread from Anna's old sewing box, though she had asked permission before opening it and had closed the lid as carefully as a prayer. You did not have to use that color, he said. Mabel did not look up. It was already threaded on the needle. Anna used yellow on purpose. Then I am glad I did not waste it. Caleb had no answer, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was almost peaceful. Then wagon wheels sounded in the yard. Not the rough clatter of a supply wagon. These wheels rolled slow and certain, the way town people arrived when they had already judged what they came to see. Caleb's face hardened before the knock came. Mabel noticed. Someone you expected? Someone I hoped would wait longer. He opened the front door, and Beatrice Harlow stepped inside without being invited. She wore a dark traveling dress, gloves buttoned at the wrist, and a hat pinned so precisely it looked like a warning. Behind her stood Pastor Emmett Vale and Sheriff Roy Tilden, both looking uncomfortable enough to prove they had not come for coffee. Beatrice's eyes moved past Caleb to the kitchen, to the stove, to Mabel's full figure beneath the apron, then to Lucy sleeping in the basket. Her mouth tightened. So the rumor was true. Caleb shut the door. Good morning to you too, Beatrice. Do not good morning me when my sister's child is being kept in a kitchen with a stranger. Mabel dried her hands on her apron and stood still. She did not hide behind Caleb. She did not step forward either. Beatrice held out a folded paper. The pastor and sheriff are here as witnesses. I filed a concern with the county office. A widowed rancher alone with an infant, no proper female relation in the household, no nurse, no family support, and now this. Her eyes touched Mabel again, cold as window frost. A hired cook mistaken for stability. Caleb did not take the paper. Say what you came to say. Sheriff Tilden cleared his throat. Caleb, this is not formal removal. Not today. Not today, Beatrice repeated. You have 7 days to prove this house is fit for Lucy. Regular meals. Clean rooms. Proper care. Respectable arrangements. If not, I will petition for the child to live with her mother's family in Miles City. The kitchen seemed to shrink around the words. Caleb's hand tightened on the doorframe. Lucy stirred in the basket, sensing the change before she understood it. Mabel looked down at the baby, and all the color drained from her face, but her voice stayed steady. A baby should not be moved like furniture because adults are grieving. Beatrice turned on her. And you should not speak as if you have standing here. Caleb took one step forward. Careful. Beatrice laughed softly. You hired a fat cook and mistook it for a family. That is not my cruelty, Caleb. That is your desperation. The words struck Mabel in front of everyone, but she did not bow under them. She folded her hands once, then released them. Give me 7 days. Caleb looked at her. Mabel. 7 days, she said again, eyes still on Lucy. I will keep the kitchen, the linens, the feeding times, the sleeping times. I will write it all down if the pastor needs proof. Miss Harlow wants order. We can give her order. Beatrice's face sharpened. You think biscuits and folded towels make a mother? Mabel looked up then. No, ma'am. But hunger, cold, and fear do not make a home either. Pastor. Vale lowered his gaze. Sheriff Tilden shifted his hat from one hand to the other. Caleb saw it all, the insult, the courage, the way Mabel stood in his kitchen as if she had no right to be there and still refused to let Lucy pay the price for it. Later that night, after Beatrice's wagon disappeared down the road and the house settled into darkness, Caleb found Mabel by the stove, mending the torn hem of her own dress by firelight. Lucy slept in the basket beside her foot, one tiny hand wrapped around the edge of Mabel's apron. Caleb stood in the doorway a long while before speaking. Why are you helping me? Mabel did not lift her eyes from the needle. I am not only helping you. The fire snapped softly. Then who? She looked at Lucy. A baby should not have to earn a safe place by crying loud enough for grown people to listen. Caleb said nothing. Outside, the wind moved across the ranch, but inside the kitchen, the stove held, the child slept, and 7 days had begun. On the 4th day, Beatrice Harlow returned with half the town tucked behind her like witnesses at a hanging, though no rope was needed when women knew how to use their tongues. 2 church ladies climbed down from the wagon first, Mrs. Abigail Pike with her narrow eyes and Mrs. Ruth Bell with a basket she never opened. Pastor Vale followed, carrying a small notebook as if a child's piece could be measured in ink. Sheriff Tilden came last, looking as if he would rather be anywhere else in Montana. Caleb met them on the porch, hat low, shoulders set. You are early. Beatrice smiled without warmth. A proper home should not need warning. From the kitchen, Mabel heard every word. She stood beside the stove with flour on her palms and Lucy sitting awake in the basket near her skirts, blinking up at the light. For 4 days, the ranch had held together by small things. Bottles warmed on time. Linens boiled and dried. Floors swept. Bread baked. Caleb slept 2 hours at a time instead of none. The men spoke softer. Lucy had begun to watch Mabel with the solemn trust of a baby who had decided the world might be safe after all. Mabel wiped her hands and lifted the child before opening the kitchen door. Beatrice's eyes landed on the baby first, then on the apron stretched across Mabel's soft middle. Still carrying her everywhere, I see. She was awake, Mabel said. Babies are often awake, Miss Carter. That does not mean hired help should attach themselves. Caleb's jaw moved, but Mabel gave him the slightest look. Not yet. The inspection began in the parlor. Mrs. Pike ran one gloved finger along the mantel and found no dust, which seemed to disappoint her. Mrs. Bell checked the folded baby cloths and said they were acceptable, though her mouth made the word sound like an insult. Pastor Vale asked about feeding times. Mabel answered each question clearly, giving hours, amounts, naps, and the way Lucy settled best when the stove was warm but not hot. Sheriff Tilden looked quietly impressed. Beatrice looked angry that there was nothing obvious to condemn. Then they entered the kitchen. Bread cooled beneath a clean towel. Stew simmered low. Lucy's cradle had been moved away from the draft. Sunlight touched the yellow stitching on the blanket. Mrs. Pike looked Mabel up and down. Order can be taught, she said. Gentleness cannot. Mabel held Lucy closer but did not answer. Mrs. Bell added, a child learns from what holds her. Rough hands, rough manners, rough appetites. Caleb's face darkened. That is enough. Beatrice stepped between them. No, Caleb. These are fair concerns. Your daughter is not a biscuit to be passed into whichever warm hands happen to be near. She turned to Mabel. Do you expect respectable people to believe a woman like you can teach a child tenderness? The kitchen went still. Mabel felt the old shame rise, familiar as smoke, but she looked down at Lucy instead of at the women. The baby had one hand curled around Mabel's apron string. Mabel gently loosened the tiny fingers and placed them against the blanket. Then she lifted her chin. No, ma'am. I expect the child to tell you herself. Beatrice gave a short laugh. Gladly. She reached for Lucy. Mabel did not want to let go. Every part of her resisted it. But Caleb stood near enough to stop anything cruel, and the pastor watched with his notebook half closed. So Mabel placed Lucy carefully into Beatrice's arms. At first, Lucy only stared. Beatrice smiled in triumph. There now. Then Lucy's face changed. Her mouth trembled. Her body stiffened against the unfamiliar hold. A thin cry rose, startled and frightened, cutting through the clean kitchen like winter wind under a door. Beatrice bounced her once. Hush now. Lucy cried harder. Mrs. Pike clicked her tongue and reached out. The baby turned away from her. Mrs. Bell tried a silver rattle from her basket. Lucy wailed until her breath broke. Pastor Vale took one step forward, then stopped, helpless. Caleb moved, but Lucy did not reach for him. Her red little face turned across the room, past Beatrice, past the church ladies, straight toward Mabel. Both tiny arms lifted. No one spoke. Beatrice's smile vanished. Mabel stood frozen, hands pressed to her apron, afraid to take what the child was offering in front of people who already believed she had no right to be loved. Caleb looked at his daughter, then at Mabel. His voice came low and clear. Go to her. Mabel crossed the kitchen. Beatrice tried to hold her ground, but Lucy leaned so hard toward Mabel that even Mrs. Pike gasped. The moment Mabel gathered the baby against her shoulder, the crying broke, softened, and disappeared. Lucy pressed her damp cheek into Mabel's neck and sighed. The only sound left was the stew bubbling on the stove and Sheriff Tilden closing his notebook without writing another word. For a moment after Lucy went quiet, no one in the kitchen seemed willing to believe what their own eyes had seen. Beatrice stood with her arms empty, her gloves creased where she had held the child too tightly, her face pale with anger and humiliation. Mrs. Pike looked at the floor. Mrs. Bell closed the basket with the useless silver rattle still inside. Pastor Vale pressed his notebook against his chest like it might hide the truth from him. Mabel held Lucy against her shoulder and kept one hand over the baby's back, moving it in slow circles. She did not look proud. She looked frightened by how much she cared. Beatrice found her voice first. That proves nothing except habit. Caleb turned toward her. It proves my daughter knows where she is safe. Safe, Beatrice repeated. With a woman nobody knows? A woman who arrived in the dark with no family, no standing, no respectable history, and a body half the women in town have already talked about. Mabel's hand stilled on Lucy's back. Caleb saw it. He saw the way Mabel's eyes lowered, not in agreement, but from years of learning how to survive rooms where people made her sighs sound like a sin. Something in him went quiet. Not soft. Quiet the way land goes still before thunder. You will not speak to her that way in my house. Beatrice stared at him. Your house? Caleb, this is Anna's child. Yes, Caleb said. And Anna's child is sleeping because of Mabel Carter. She is the cook. Caleb stepped between Beatrice and Mabel, not touching either woman, but placing himself where every person in the room had to see the line he was drawing. She is not your shame to name. The words fell hard. Mrs. Pike's mouth opened, then closed. Caleb continued, each sentence low and plain. She is not a hired hand for you to measure. She is not a joke for my men, a rumor for your church circle, or a problem for you to solve. She is under my roof. Beatrice's eyes flashed. Under your roof is exactly the concern. Then write this down, Caleb said, looking at Pastor Vale. The pastor lifted his head. Caleb pointed toward the stove, the clean linens, the bread cooling on the table, the baby asleep in Mabel's arms. 4 days ago, this house had no order. My daughter would not sleep. I could not keep milk warm without spilling half of it. I had grief in every room and no sense left in my hands. That woman walked in hungry, tired, and unwanted by people who should have known better, and she made this place livable before asking one thing for herself. Sheriff Tilden looked toward Mabel. That is true from what I can see. Beatrice snapped, you are all being sentimental. From the doorway, Gus Miller's voice answered before Caleb could. No, ma'am. We are being honest. Everyone turned. Gus stood there with his hat in both hands, Tommy and Eli behind him. His weathered face had gone red, but he did not back away. I made a poor joke the first morning Miss Carter came. I was wrong. Since she has been here, the men have eaten, the baby has slept, and Mr. Whitaker has stood upright like a man again. If that does not count for something, then I do not know what your paper is worth. Mabel's eyes filled, but she kept her chin up. Beatrice looked around the room and saw no one stepping to her side. Caleb, she said sharply, you are letting a cook cloud your judgment. Caleb looked at Lucy, then at Mabel, then back at Beatrice. No. I was a dead man hiring help. My child found life before I did. The kitchen went completely silent. Even the stove seemed to hush. Mabel looked at him as if no one had ever stood between her and shame before. Caleb did not reach for her. He did not make a promise the room could gossip over. He simply stood there, steady and certain, while Lucy slept against Mabel's shoulder. At last Sheriff Tilden tucked his notebook away. I will report that the child appears well cared for. Pastor Vale nodded. As will I. Beatrice's face hardened, but she had no weapon left except departure. She turned for the door, her church women following like shadows pulled by the same string. When the wagons rolled out of the yard, Caleb remained beside Mabel in the warm kitchen, and for the first time, she did not look like a woman waiting to be sent away. Spring came slowly to the Whitaker ranch, not all at once, but in small mercies that looked like ordinary things. The snow pulled back from the fence posts. The creek loosened under its lid of ice. Calves began appearing in the south pasture, shaky-legged and stubbornly alive. Inside the house, the stove stayed warm from before sunrise until after dark, and nobody who stepped through the kitchen door mistook the place for a house waiting to die. Mabel Carter was still there, though not because Caleb had asked her to stay the wrong way. The morning after Beatrice left, he had placed 3 things on the table: her wages counted fair, a letter of reference written in his own hand, and the key to the pantry. You earned all 3, he had said. You can take the money and go wherever you choose. You can stay as cook with proper pay and your own room. Or you can stay because this house has room, if your heart has any wish to. Mabel had looked at the money, then the letter, then Lucy asleep in the cradle with one hand wrapped around the yellow blanket. "I will stay as cook," she had said at first, because pride was easier than hope. Caleb had nodded as if that answer was enough, and, because he did not press her, something in her began to trust him. Weeks passed. Her room moved from the stove corner to the small room facing east, where morning light came soft through the curtains. The men began knocking before entering the kitchen. Gus brought her a new pair of shoes from town and left them by the door with no speech attached. Tommy repaired the loose step she always avoided. Eli carved Lucy a wooden horse small enough for her fist. Caleb changed most of all, though he changed quietly. He learned to laugh under his breath. He learned to let Lucy smear mashed carrots on his sleeve without looking ruined by it. He learned to sit at the table after supper while Mabel mended or mixed dough, speaking not to fill silence, but because silence no longer frightened him. One evening, he carried Anna's portrait down from the parlor and set it on the kitchen shelf where sunlight touched the frame. Mabel saw it and went still. Caleb only said, "She belongs where the living are." Mabel placed a small jar of wildflowers beside the picture, and he did not look away from her kindness. By early summer, Lucy could sit in the high chair Caleb built from pine boards and patience. Her hair curled soft at the back of her head. Her cheeks had filled. Her laugh came easily now, especially when Mabel dusted flour on her own nose and pretended not to know where it came from. The day Lucy spoke, rain was falling warm over the yard, and biscuits were rising under a towel. Caleb stood near the stove, drying a tin cup. Mabel leaned over the high chair with a spoon of applesauce. Lucy pushed the spoon away, reached both hands toward her, and said one clear word. "Mama." Mabel froze. The spoon trembled. Caleb set the cup down very carefully. The room held its breath. Mabel whispered, "Oh, sweetheart, you do not have to call me that." Lucy smiled as if the matter had already been settled by heaven itself. "Mama," she said again. Mabel covered her mouth, but the tears came anyway, quiet and clean. Caleb crossed the kitchen, lifted Lucy from the chair, and stood beside Mabel in the firelight. "I thought I needed help," he said. "I thought I needed meals cooked, bottles warmed, linens folded, and a house kept decent enough that no one could take my daughter away." Mabel looked up at him through tears. Caleb's voice softened. "But this house knew better than I did." He reached for her hand, not to claim it, only to offer his own. Mabel placed her fingers in